All right, let's get right into it. We're going to be exploring a really fascinating theory from our source material today. It suggests there's a hidden pattern woven into the very fabric of time, a kind of secret rhythm that's been ticking away for thousands of years.
So, I want you to think about this for a second. What if that whole sprawling biblical timeline isn't random at all? What if it's not just one event after another, but a deliberate repeating code? That's the core idea we're going to unpack, that history isn't just a story, it's a structure.
And believe it or not, according to the theory we're looking at, the key, the master key to this whole thing is just one number, 70. Yeah, 70. The idea is that this isn't just some important number. It's literally the gear that makes the whole divine clock tick.
Okay, so the blueprint, Adam's foundation. So how does this all work? Well, to get it, we've got to go way, way back, like back to the very beginning. The theory we're exploring claims the entire blueprint for history was set in the life of Adam himself. So check this out. Before the clock of history as we know it even started ticking, the idea is that Adam was living in this state called Ionian life. Think of it as a kind of timeless zone. No decay, no entropy, just being. And he was in that state for his first 70 years. So for 70 years, he wasn't aging like we do. It was almost like a prologue to the main story of our timeline.
Okay, and this is where the math really starts to click into place. It's super important for the theory. You've got those first 70 years in that timeless state, right? Then, the fall happens. Time as we know it begins. Then you add the 930 years of his mortal life that are actually recorded. And what do you get? Exactly 1,000 years. The source we're looking at calls this a single divine day. So those first 70 years, they're not just extra time. They're the hidden piece of the puzzle that makes the whole pattern work.
The obstacle, a timeline concealed. So you might be thinking, if this pattern is so foundational, so important, why haven't I heard of it? Why isn't it common knowledge? Well, here's the twist. The source material argues that the timeline was actually changed, that this whole pattern was intentionally hidden.
So how did that happen? Well, the theory gets pretty specific. It points to a major difference between two ancient manuscripts. On one side, you've got the Septuagint timeline. It's older and longer. On the other, the Masoretic text, which is what most modern Bibles are based on, and it's shorter. The claim is that the Masoretic timeline was basically edited down. Years were shaved off, and in one case, a whole generation, a guy named Canaan, was just deleted, all supposedly to hide this original pattern.
But why? What would be the motive for doing something like that? Well, according to this theory, it all comes down to prophecy, specifically Daniel's famous 70 weeks prophecy. The idea is that if you use the original longer timeline, that prophecy lands perfectly on Jesus in 30 AD. But if you shrink the timeline, it misses him. It points somewhere else entirely. That's the proposed motive.
All right, next section. The pivot, the 70 AD event. And this is where it all comes together. This is the central piece of evidence in the whole theory, where that number we started with, 70, shows up again in a huge dramatic way.
Okay, so the source calls Jesus the second Adam. Now look at this timeline. From his birth, around year 0, to the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple is exactly 70 years. Let that sink in. 70 years. The theory says there is no way that's a coincidence. It's a perfect echo, a bookend to the 70 years the first Adam had before his fall.
And this quote from our source really puts a fine point on it. That 70 AD event wasn't just another historical marker. It was a total game changer. It's seen as the moment the entire Old Covenant system was, as they put it, dismantled. It was the end of an era, and it triggered the global exile, with the source calls being cast into outer darkness. So let's move on to the payoff, a symmetrical future. Now, you might think the story ends there, in 70 AD, but according to this theory, that's not the end at all. It's the middle. Think of it like the center of a giant mirror. Everything that happened before it is going to be reflected perfectly into our future. So on one side of this historical mirror, you have the event of 70 AD. It's the moment of judgment, the moment of dispersal. We're calling it the scattering. This is the first half of a mirrored structure. Basically, what happens on one side is reflected on the other. So if the scattering is what happened on one side of the mirror, what's on the other side? What's the reflection? Well, the theory projects a perfectly symmetrical event 2,000 years later, in the year 2070. And if the first one was the scattering, then its perfect mirror image has to be the gathering, a moment of restoration.
So where does this idea come from? It's linked to prophecies like in Hosea, which talks about being revived after 2 days. In this reading, those 2 days are interpreted as 2,000 years. But here's the real payoff. This moment, this gathering in 2070, is supposed to be when those 70 years of timeless life that Adam lost are symbolically given back. It's the completion of the whole cycle. It brings everything right back to where it all began.
All right, so let's zoom out and look at the big picture here. The big idea, the 70-year pulse. When you put it all together, from Adam's first 70 years to that critical 70-year period ending in 70 AD, you start to see what this theory is proposing. A master pattern, a rhythmic pulse of 70 years that's been beating underneath history the entire time.
This table really lays it all out nice and clean. It's the master chronology according to this theory. You've got the fall in 3855 BC, which starts the 6,000-year clock. Then, bam, the pivot point, the judgment and scattering in 70 AD. And that sets up the symmetrical endpoint, the gathering and restoration in 2070 AD. See how it all fits? It's a perfect, symmetrical structure, all held together by that number, 70.
So when all is said and done, what's the big takeaway here? According to the source material we've been exploring, the number 70 isn't just a recurring number. It's presented as something much more profound, like a divine fingerprint pressed into the fabric of time itself, marking the beginning, the absolute center, and the proposed end.
And that really just leaves us with one final thought, one last question to chew on. Look, whether you buy into this specific timeline or not, it forces you to look at history in a new way, doesn't it? It makes you wonder, if time really is a code, what else have we been looking at every day that's just hidden in plain sight?